the breakup of the United Kingdom.
In becoming the true poets and continuous creators of life, very often it is our actions which precede a change in our emotions and belief structures. Thus, if one is striving to remake themselves, initially they will need to act in a somewhat fraudulent manner.
So this is when migration from the Commonwealth became even more important. Initially, in the post-war era, migration from the Commonwealth was greatly received. The UK needed an increased labour force, and the Commonwealth provided the necessary support for that. As the post-war era passed, the acceptance of Commonwealth migrants decreased. This was regardless if the labour was still required in order to sustain the economy or not. They're just, the tide started to turn against this kind of migration.
The only reason a British person would have gone abroad would be as part of a world war to fight the Germans or Japanese. In those days, a man born in the Middle East or Africa would not have had any concept of travelling to Europe unless he were very rich. Various things happened to change this. Until now, many people from Britain travel to other countries routinely, and people from foreign countries come here, and not just on holiday either. This is a worldwide trend, and it's been caused by technological developments. It was not deliberately planned. At the same time, with modern inventions like the internet and mobile telephones and computers, we can see what's happening in other parts of the world. So a man in an African country becomes aware that he's living in poverty, and that in other parts of the world, like Western Europe and the United States, people are doing a good deal better than they are in Mali or Zaire. The same happens in the Middle East and South Asia. Many of these people happen to be Muslim, but it's not part of some master plan either. It just happens that many Muslim countries are poorer than those in the Christian West.
In 1962, there was the Commonwealth Immigrants Act. The act was the first piece of legislation intended to halt the free movement of Commonwealth citizens to the United Kingdom. Any individual who did not have a British passport or had been by birth or descent entitled to a passport faced restrictions. In order to work in the UK, people now had to acquire a work voucher. However, this 1962 act largely failed in its attempt to restrict migration from the Commonwealth. Demand for workers was so high that companies were more than willing to provide vouchers for migrants to make the passage. And in many ways, the voucher system streamlined the migration process for many people and helped facilitate more migration. In 1965, the ability to issue vouchers was severely constrained for this reason.
Let's look at another individual part of immigration as it affects Britain. It is commonly observed that many of the National Health Service's doctors and nurses were not trained in Britain. In some parts of the country, they make up the majority of medical staff. In the Essex town of Thurrock, for instance, 70%, that's more than 2/3 of doctors working in the town, are foreigners who qualified abroad. This cannot be chance alone. Surely it must be part of some organised plan.
And then in 1968, there was the second Commonwealth Immigrants Act. And this piece of legislation was created to further restrict Commonwealth migrants. This was prompted by the arrival of British passport holders from Kenyan Asians who were fleeing the harsh policies of a newly independent Kenya at the time. Now, in order to be classed as a British Commonwealth citizen, an individual had to prove they or at least one of their grandparents were born in the United Kingdom or were naturalized in the United Kingdom or became a citizen of the United Kingdom and the colonies by virtue of being adopted in the United Kingdom or became a British citizen through the rule in the British Nationality Act in 1948.
Not a bit of it. Of course, if we had a patriotic and principled Prime Minister who realised that Britain needed more doctors, then he or she would spend a lot of money expanding our medical schools and training more doctors in this country. Of course, nobody would ever muddle up Boris Johnson with a patriotic or principled man.
Despite the criticism, the Boris Johnson government remains unrelenting.
We were taught that it was the invasion of Alexander that civilized us. The Shakas and the Kushans were good for the natives. The invasion of Muhammad bin Qasim, the Ghoris, the Tughlaqs, the Lodhis, the Mughals, they were all good for India. Akbar was great.
And so he and his predecessors adopted quite a different approach. It would cost a lot of money to train new doctors in Britain, and it would be at least 6 or 7 years before those doctors began working for the NHS. Parliaments, though, only last for a maximum of 5 years, and so there's a good chance that whichever Prime Minister who began such a scheme wouldn't even gain any political capital from it. He would authorise a lot of government spending, which isn't popular, and not even get the credit when the doctors started work. How much better not to spend a single penny on training doctors and instead to hire some poorly qualified people from Egypt, Nigeria and Bangladesh. Then you can announce with a straight face that you have increased the number of doctors working for the NHS by 1,000 this year.
Our books mention Newton, but conveniently shrink passages on the 6th century mathematician Brahmagupta. Indians are not taught that it was one of their own who first developed numericals 1 to 9 and 0. Our history books have no mention of Vedic maths and how it inspired the world, or how the world learnt from the Hindu agricultural practices.
There's what catches the headlines and possibly garners you some votes. If you are unscrupulous, then you won't worry that this kind of thing is screwing up your country. It might get you re-elected, and that's all that counts. All the problems that we in this country are facing with immigration are like this, not a manifestation of Barbara Specter's cunning or part of the Great Replacement, but simply a byproduct of changes in technology and decisions made by ruthless and disloyal politicians.
So we have started to see more and more restrictive policies. In 1981, there was the British Nationality Act, and this act attempted to streamline immigration policies along with restrict immigrants from entering the United Kingdom. Due to changes since 1962, not all citizens of the UK and colonies had an automatic right to abode in Britain. And the act abolished the category of citizen of the United Kingdom and colonies and replaced it with 3 new categories. There was the British citizens, British overseas citizenship, British dependent territory system. So there were really these kind of 3 categories of citizenship. Mothers now also pass their citizenship on to children, where previously only men were able to do so. This is unfortunately also still the case in many countries around the world today, that citizenship still in many cases only goes through the father and not through the mother. That is not the case in the UK or the European Union or many other Western developed countries, but we do see that in other countries today.
Now, here's the thing. There is no guarantee if this money will be used to help the migrants. There is also no guarantee if the migrants will be treated fairly. Like I said, Rwanda's record on human rights is abysmal.
Ancient India was the world's most favored trading nation. The influence of the Indian civilization on Southeast Asia, also omitted from Indian history books, is the Ahom dynasty. They ruled Assam for 600 years and even defeated the British. Why do our books gloss over the Cholas and the Pandyas? Our textbooks are still not free of British influence.
We can't really change or halt the developments in technology which have precipitated globalism, but about the politicians we can do something. But bringing immigration to the forefront of the agenda and making it plain to those in Downing Street that if they carry on this way they will lose votes, it's going to take a bit of an effort.
The United Kingdom has itself condemned Rwanda on numerous occasions. January 2021, UK's Director General for Europe told the UNHRC that his country remains concerned about Rwanda's continued restrictions on civil and political rights.
And it is not just about Indian history. The world history we study also reeks of strong British bias. Take World War II, for example. Our books glorify the British and the American troops. What about the Indians who fought in the British Army? What Western historians also do not realize is that the turning point of the Second World War was the defeat of the Nazi army in Russia. The British can go ahead and hide this from their students, but why are we? India is still living in the shackles of the Raj.
The same United Kingdom now expects Rwanda to rehabilitate refugees.
I think it is possible to change the perspective of British politicians, but it requires people to cut up rough and be prepared to make a fuss.
But it will have an impact. We're hearing stories.
And one does not have to look far to find evidence.
I know that for a fact. And I think there's a fear as well that, so one day England won't be English people here. It'll be all foreigners.
Therefore, in the eyes of the law, the UK Parliament simply acts as a sovereign body, and the precedence it sets in doing so makes it sovereign, according to court rulings.